I had always believed that family was the one thing in life you could count on, no matter what. My parents, Susan and James, raised me with this unwavering sense of loyalty, always emphasizing that blood was thicker than water. But that belief began to unravel the day they forced me to divorce the love of my life, my husband, Ethan. It was the year of my 27th birthday, and instead of receiving the usual heartfelt celebrations I'd grown accustomed to, I found myself sitting in a dimly lit living room, facing my parents' cold, emotionless demands. Ethan and I had met in college. He was charming, smart, and ambitious, with a quiet determination that drew me in. We had a simple life, full of love and laughter. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. I worked as a marketing coordinator at a small but promising firm, and Ethan had a job in software development. We lived in a modest two-bedroom apartment, but it felt like a mansion to me because it was ours, a place where we could create our future together. For the first time in my life, I felt content. But my parents didn't share in our joy. They had always been more concerned with appearances, with keeping up with the latest trends in the neighborhood and maintaining a facade of perfection. They believed that I could do better than Ethan. He wasn't from the right family, they said. He didn't come from money, and his career, while promising, wasn't a guarantee of wealth. They thought I deserved someone with a pedigree, someone who could provide me with more than just love and companionship. At first, I brushed off their comments. Ethan and I were happy, but as time went on, their constant disapproval became impossible to ignore. They would make snide remarks about his lack of ambition or his uncertain future. They would invite us to family gatherings, only to make it clear that he wasn't welcome, or at least not fully accepted. I began to feel torn between the people I loved and the people who had always been there for me. The tipping point came one night when my parents invited us to dinner. They'd promised it would be a simple gathering, but the tension was palpable the moment we arrived. My father, typically warm and engaging, barely acknowledged Ethan's presence. My mother, usually kind and welcoming, looked at him with a certain distaste that I had never noticed before. I could see Ethan becoming uncomfortable, trying his best to engage in polite conversation, but it was clear that he didn't belong in their world. After dinner, when we were alone in their living room, my parents made their move. My father spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. They didn't think Ethan was right for me, and they wanted me to make a choice. I could either stay with him and continue to be a disappointment to them, or I could end the relationship and marry someone they deemed more appropriate. They didn't even give me a chance to speak, didn't let me explain how I felt. They simply stated their demands, and when I hesitated, they gave me an ultimatum. I had 1 month to decide. I was stunned. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. My parents, the people who had raised me, who had taught me about loyalty and love, were telling me to end my marriage. It felt like my world was crumbling around me. Ethan and I had built something together, something real, and yet here I was, being forced to choose between the love of my life and the people I had always turned to for guidance. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that my parents were right. Ethan didn't fit into their world, and maybe I didn't either. I felt guilty for ever questioning their judgment. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. Ethan could sense something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. Instead, I pulled away. I became distant, cold, and unfeeling, even though my heart ached every time I saw him. The man I loved was about to lose everything, and it was all because of my family's pressure. I had tried to make it work, but it felt impossible. My loyalty was being torn in 2 different directions, and the weight of it was unbearable. But in the end, I made the decision to follow my parents' wishes. I ended things with Ethan. He was devastated, and so was I, but I didn't know how to escape the suffocating grip my parents had on me. They were all I had, and I didn't know how to stand up to them. It wasn't long before the truth about Ethan's past came to light, but not in the way anyone expected. A few months after the divorce, my parents were hosting a charity event at their house, and I was helping them with the preparations. One of their guests, an old family friend named Angela, approached me with a look of shock on her face. She had just come from a private meeting with a wealthy businessman, and she had overheard some interesting details about Ethan. Apparently, Ethan wasn't just a software developer. He was the heir to a vast fortune, one that stretched across industries. His family had kept it a secret for years, preferring to let him live a normal life without the pressures that came with his wealth. It turned out that Ethan had been deliberately hiding his true identity because he didn't want to be judged based on his family's wealth. The more I learned about his background, the more I realized how deeply I had misunderstood him. He wasn't the nobody my parents had made him out to be. He was the one who had chosen a simple life, a life with me, because he loved me. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had just walked away from a man who could have given me everything I ever wanted. Comfort, luxury, security, but none of that mattered to him. He had wanted me, not my family's money or status. My parents, on the other hand, were oblivious to what was happening. They never once thought to question their assumptions about Ethan. They had forced me to make the worst decision of my life, all because of their own misguided fears and prejudice. And now, as I learned the truth, I couldn't help but feel a surge of betrayal. They had pushed me into a decision I could never undo, and they had no idea how deeply they had hurt me. It didn't take long for me to realize that the only thing I could do was rebuild my life. I couldn't undo the past, but I could start fresh. I took a deep breath and made the decision to take control of my own future. I would contact Ethan, apologize for everything, and tell him the truth. I knew it would take time for him to forgive me, but I had to try. And as for my parents, I didn't know what to do about them yet. They had destroyed my marriage, but the truth had come too late for them to undo their actions. They would regret it when they found out who Ethan really was. But for now, all I could do was move forward, and I would do so without looking back. It was late when I finally reached out to Ethan, and when the phone rang, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened between us. My hands trembled slightly as I waited for him to pick up. The call connected, and I heard his voice on the other end. It wasn't the voice of the man I had known before, calm and steady, but the one that carried an edge of confusion and pain. It broke my heart. I apologized for everything, for not trusting him, for allowing my parents to dictate my choices, for making him feel as if he wasn't enough. I told him the truth about what I had learned, the wealth, the family secret, and how deeply it had shattered me. I expected him to be angry with me, to tell me that I had hurt him beyond repair, but instead, he just listened. There was silence between us, and then finally he spoke. He told me that he had always wanted to tell me the truth, but he didn't want to lose me, didn't want me to think he was only interested in me for my family's wealth. He had loved me enough to keep that part of himself hidden, hoping that our love was enough to keep us together. In a way, he had been protecting me, shielding me from the very thing I thought would make us different. And now, when the truth was out, I could hear the resignation in his voice, the sadness that I hadn't been able to see him for who he truly was. I felt a pang of guilt, sharper than anything I had experienced before. We had been so close, so in love, and I had let something as trivial as money come between us. I realized in that moment that it wasn't the wealth that mattered. It was never about the money. It was about the trust, the connection, the future we could have built together. But now I had shattered it all, and I wasn't sure if there was a way to fix it. Over the next few days, I couldn't get Ethan's voice out of my head. I replayed our conversation over and over, thinking about all the things I could have said, should have said. I thought about how much I had given up, how much I had sacrificed for the sake of appeasing my parents. And then I thought about Ethan, the man who had given me everything without asking for anything in return. My heart ached with the realization that I had been so blinded by my family's expectations that I had failed to see the true value in the man I had married. But just as I was beginning to accept that I had made the biggest mistake of my life, my parents came back into the picture. They didn't know about Ethan's family, not yet. But they had heard whispers, and that's all it took. They called me in for another meeting, their voices trembling with concern, with fear. They had always been good at hiding their emotions, but this time it was different. They were desperate. They begged me to come back to them, to fix things, to make it right. They told me they were sorry for what they had done, for pushing me into a corner, but it was too late. I couldn't forgive them for what they had done. The damage was done, and the reality of their actions was sinking in. They didn't care about me, they cared about appearances, about status, about keeping up with the Joneses. They had sacrificed my happiness for their own sense of security, and now they were reaping the consequences. I was furious, but not just with them. I was angry with myself, too. I had let them dictate my choices for too long, let them tell me who I should be with, how I should live my life. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about me, my own agency, my ability to make decisions for myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval or their judgment. I was an adult, capable of making my own choices, and I would no longer let them control me. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. I contacted Ethan again, this time with the intention of apologizing for everything, of telling him the truth about how I felt. But it wasn't just an apology anymore. It was a declaration of who I was, who I wanted to be. I had made mistakes, yes, but I wasn't going to let my past define me. I wasn't going to let my parents' opinions hold me back any longer. I was going to take control of my life, my future, and I wanted him to be a part of it. But when I reached out to him, I was met with a surprise I wasn't prepared for. Ethan had been busy, but not with what I had expected. The truth about his wealth had spread, and the backlash from his family had been intense. But it wasn't just about them anymore. He was starting to make moves, big moves, business deals, investments, partnerships. Ethan wasn't just sitting idly by, waiting for things to fall into place. He was building something massive, something that would change his life, and mine forever. He had started to branch out, to take charge of his own destiny, and it was only a matter of time before the world knew who he really was. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of awe and jealousy. While I had been stuck in a whirlwind of family drama and self-doubt, Ethan was flourishing. He had already moved past the shame of his family's expectations. He was playing the game, but on his own terms. And as the realization hit me, I knew that I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living in the shadows, stuck in the life my parents had forced me into. I had to find my own way. It wasn't going to be easy. My parents would never accept my decision, and they would probably try to discredit me, to manipulate me into giving up on everything I had worked for. But for the first time, I didn't care. I had found something more valuable than wealth or family approval: freedom. The freedom to choose my own path, to stand up for myself, to be who I wanted to be without anyone telling me how I should live. I was ready to step into the light, to embrace the unknown and everything that came with it. And no one, not even my parents, could take that away from me. It wasn't until I heard the news that things truly began to unravel. Ethan had decided to step out of the shadows completely. He had made a series of high-profile investments, and now he was worth more than anyone could have imagined. He wasn't just successful, he was a billionaire, and it wasn't just because of his family wealth. He had built his own empire from the ground up, proving to everyone, including my parents, that he was more than what they had thought. And as the news broke, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. My parents had made their choice, but so had I. And now, the tables were about to turn. It didn't take long for the news of Ethan's success to spread like wildfire. The media outlets were buzzing with stories about the mysterious billionaire who had quietly built his fortune from the ground up. There were articles, interviews, and even reports on the investments he had made, including a few major partnerships with tech giants that were making headlines. Ethan, the man my parents had dismissed as unworthy, was now the very thing they had always wanted: successful, influential, and admired. As the days passed, my parents' attitude toward me began to shift. The facade of concern and guilt they had shown when they first pushed me to divorce Ethan seemed to dissolve, replaced with a strange, almost desperate urgency. It was as if they had suddenly realized the enormity of their mistake. They began calling, sending texts, and dropping by unannounced, trying to mend a relationship that had been irreparably damaged. They had been so focused on their perception of success, on appearances, that they never once stopped to consider the depth of their actions. They had treated me as if I were disposable, as if my choices and happiness didn't matter. But now, seeing Ethan's success, They wanted to rewrite the narrative. They tried to make excuses, telling me how proud they were of my strength, but the words felt hollow. They didn't care about my happiness. They cared about being associated with success, about being able to claim that I had chosen the right man, the man they had approved of. But I wasn't interested in their approval anymore. The truth was, I had spent too long living for others, trying to meet their expectations, and it had cost me everything. My marriage to Ethan, my sense of self, all of it had been sacrificed on the altar of their control. As the calls and texts kept coming, I ignored them. I didn't owe them anything. They had never supported me the way they should have. They had never seen me for who I was. They saw me as a tool, a means to an end. But Ethan had never treated me that way. He had seen me as an equal, as someone worth cherishing, someone worth fighting for. And yet, I had allowed my parents to tear that apart. Ethan's success only made the situation more complicated. The more I learned about his rise to wealth, the more I realized that everything I had once known about him had been a lie, but not in the way I had imagined. I had thought he was hiding his wealth out of shame, out of a desire to keep his life simple. But in reality, he had hidden it because he didn't want anyone to think that he had used money as a crutch. He had built his empire on his own, from the ground up, without the help of his family. It was a sobering realization. He had been more independent than I had ever realized, more self-made than I had given him credit for. And it was that strength, that drive, that had always drawn me to him. But I had let it slip through my fingers. A few weeks later, I ran into Ethan at a gala. The event was for a charity his company had partnered with, and I had been invited by an old friend who knew the organizers. The moment I saw him, I felt a flood of emotions. Ethan was standing by the stage, chatting with a group of investors, looking every bit the successful billionaire he had become. His suit fit perfectly, and the confidence radiated from him in a way I had never seen before. He didn't look like the man I had once known. The quiet, unassuming man who had made me laugh over dinner or held my hand during long drives. He looked like someone who had finally realized his potential, someone who no longer needed anyone's approval, least of all mine. I wanted to walk up to him, to apologize, to tell him that I had made a mistake, but the sight of him made my heart ache with the realization that I had let him go. He was standing tall, his life unfolding in ways I hadn't imagined. He didn't need me. And the truth was, he probably didn't want me anymore. As I stood there, watching him from across the room, I felt small and insignificant. I had let my parents control my decisions, let their fear and judgment dictate my happiness, and now it was too late. He had moved on. The guilt I had been carrying began to suffocate me. I had made the wrong decision, and now I was paying the price. I had let Ethan go, thinking I was doing the right thing by listening to my parents. But the truth was, they had never known him the way I did. They had never seen the man who worked tirelessly to build his future, who loved me with a depth that I had never truly appreciated until it was too late. My parents had seen him as a failure because he didn't fit into their world, and I had gone along with it, too afraid to stand up for what I knew was right. As I walked out of the gala that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something precious. Ethan had given me everything, and I had thrown it away for the sake of family expectations. But I also knew that I had to stop living in the past. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control what happened next. I wasn't going to let my parents dictate my life anymore. I wasn't going to be their pawn in their game of appearances. I was going to make my own decisions, live my own life, and if that meant letting go of the past, then so be it. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake the thought of Ethan. I kept up with his rise to success, reading articles about his latest ventures, his philanthropic work, and his growing reputation as a businessman. The more I learned, the more I realized how far apart we had drifted. He wasn't the same man I had married. He had become a force to be reckoned with, someone who had carved out a name for himself without the help of anyone, including me. And yet, every part of me still longed for the life we had once shared. It wasn't just the wealth or the lifestyle, it was the love, the connection we had, the feeling that we had built something real together. But now I was just another name in his past, a chapter he had closed long ago. And as I sat in my apartment one evening, staring out the window at the city skyline, I couldn't help but wonder if it was truly too late to fix things. But as the days wore on, something shifted. I realized that no matter how much I regretted my decision, no matter how much I wished things had turned out differently, I could never go back to the way things were. Ethan had moved on, and I had to do the same. The truth was, I had learned a hard lesson. Sometimes, the people you think you can count on the most, your family, are the ones who will hurt you the most. And sometimes, the only way to heal is to walk away from the things that hold you back, even if that means walking away from the people you thought you would never have to leave.